Hi, everyone. It's Marcello, and I'm here with Simon and David. Simon and I co-founded an agency called Tennis. We're a website design and product development agency here in Toronto. We've got a really exciting guest today and a topic that seems to be very important. I mean, it is very important, but it also, the feedback we're getting is that we should continue to update our accessibility content. And yeah, accessibility used to feel like, in the context of discussion, that it was always about best practice, but now we're seeing it showing up more and more as a huge compliance.
Yeah, and the trickiest part is that organizations don't fail because they don't care, because they often do care. It's just a lot to handle. So they're usually failing because they don't understand what compliance means or the impact or even how to start the conversation around the design for these constraints.
Exactly. So today we're doing a web first breakdown of AODA, who it applies to, what WCAG means in plain language, how to approach this without it turning into a never ending project, or if you already have a project live and it's an issue, how to solve some of the problems. Today, we're joined by David Fanjoy, partner at McMillan, who specializes in AODA compliance. And we're going to try to talk about the whole AODA compliance, but also specifically focus on web. David, when people hear AODA, they often think of the entire built environment. Today, we're kind of trying to focus specifically on web. What does that include and what doesn't it include?
Yeah, so I think it's you're right that it's something that not all organizations really have top of their mind when they're thinking about accessibility and AODA compliance. Like you're right, like most people are thinking about the ramps going into their buildings, whether some of their products and services are provided in an accessible way, having policies as an employer. But the web content requirements have sort of always been there. They did come in sort of at a gradually as after the AODA was put in place, but they've always been there, and they're real compliance requirements. So all and what they are is it's for employer, it's by your employee count, like, which is how most of the AODA is set up. So if you have 50 or more employees in Ontario, the web accessibility requirements apply to all of your publicly available websites, web applications, and basically all the content that's on there. So it's a pretty broad compliance obligation. And the standard is the WCAG 2.0 level AA currently, which has, that's one thing that hasn't really changed, in terms of what standard they're using. But it does consistently, apply to all web content, websites, applications, all that stuff.
Right. And AAA tends to be relegated to like more government style websites and infrastructure, right?
Yeah, I mean, the government did a pretty good job of sort of like leading by example with this, like both for like deadline compliances and sort of higher thresholds. Public institutions, the actual government websites, they had the first obligations, and then now they're the ones sort of meeting a higher standard. And we're seeing when the federal government's rolling things out too, they're doing the same thing. Like we're currently, it's just the government that's required to follow these.
And I've always had this question. So AODA, Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and that seems like a sweeping, like a blanket across most of Canada. But now other provinces are starting to roll out their own specialized compliance.
Yeah, a little bit. So, yeah, the AODA, obviously, it's Ontario specific. And this just, for a bit more background, like goes back to the division between like federally regulated and provincially regulated businesses. So, 90% of business in Ontario is provincially regulated, but then you've got things like banks, telecoms, airlines, those things that sort of operate on more of a national scale. They're going to be
Mm.
regulated by the federal government. Whereas, whether you're providing sort of a basic product and service business in Ontario, it's always going to be provincially regulated. But yeah, now, so Ontario was really ahead. The AODA came out in 2005, sort of well ahead of other provinces. and we're now sort of seeing the other ones catch up. So BC has some legislation that currently applies to the government there, and then they're considering rolling it out to the private sector. Same in Nova Scotia, and then Manitoba has legislation that also applies with some web content requirements for businesses there.
Right. Oh, that's impressive. Yeah. So I guess we're,
Mm.
and then like country wise, we're playing a bit of catch up to the US, which I'm sure played a big role in how we've architected our system, right?
Yeah, I think so, and certainly Europe as well. Like they, especially like with the web, and like they've got a lot more like digital requirements, right? With like their the EU stuff, and then yeah, the US. Obviously there's some states that are they're lagging behind, but yeah, it is interesting that Ontario, took this approach quite a while ago, and it hasn't like didn't have this huge ripple effect into the other provinces, or maybe we're starting to see that now, 20 years later.
Right.
And so for organizations of over 50 employees, it's obviously there's some strict standards. I mean, plainly the site has to be compliant. Your website has to be compliant. How does monitoring and compliance actually work? Like, is there a portion of the government? Like, I've always wondered this. It seems like for a long time, working in web, we very rarely came across organizations that were had been contacted or deemed non-compliant. But over the last year, I'd say maybe year and a half, we've seen a lot. Actually, like the biggest influx of organizations that are like, the government's reached out. We've got a compliance deadline. The fines are astronomical. Like, we need help. And as an aside, that's not a great position to be in as an organization who's under the gun to redesign an entire website. So, to anyone listening, if you're in an organization of 50 employees and more, have an audit done so you understand where you're at. But how does that actually work from the government side?
Yeah, I'd say my experience has been pretty similar to yours.
Okay.
And my understanding was that when the current conservative government came in, that the budget got cut for the compliance side of the AODA. So
Okay.
it's run by the Ministry of Accessibility and Seniors, like that's who has sort of governance over it. Um, and yeah, I would say for a long time, it was very rare to see for me to have clients that actually got sort of like spot audited. But it does happen where you'll sort of get a random email from a AODA compliance officer, and they're asking to see all your different all the checklists has been met for compliance, and they will also do a review of your website, and ask you whether you've got a certificate or something showing that you've got the proper accessibility compliance. Or I believe they do their own audits if they think there's non-compliance, and they'll tell you that and then they give you a deadline to fix those. And like you said, like the fines are pretty astronomical. Um,
Yeah.
I've helped a lot of clients, like just sort of like walking them through the process. The compliance officers are usually quite flexible. Like they're not out like to use the fine scheme to like make money for the government, has been my experience. Like
Yeah.
they give reasonable deadlines. They accept explanations about like why certain things might take more time. And really, if you come at it with like, hey, we realize we're not compliant, we're working hard to fix it now, they're usually pretty reasonable, as long as you're giving them reasonable timelines. Like if you tell them you need a year to redo your website, they're probably not going to accept that. If you tell them you need like 30 or 60 days, that's like certainly more reasonable.
Yeah.
And yeah, and
So
so
that's funny because that's actually where the problem is for. And again, like you're right. Like our experience has also been that like the government is quite understanding. They're patient. But if you're a large organization, 30 to 60 days to redesign like an enterprise, like imagine McMillan's website, for instance. 30 to 60 days
Yeah.
would be crazy, right? So like companies are sort of getting into this scenario where they're just going full force into emergency mode. Um, so it's kind of funny
But
that you say that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think remediation is a little bit different
Yeah.
than like a full redesign, and I would be willing to bet, and we've been through this experience before, that as long as you're at least staying in touch, communicating, this is not legal advice. This has just been my experience on the ground. Like being very transparent about communications, like, hey, this is the plan. We're going to redesign the site. First step is audit. Second step, we're going to remediate over this 30 to 60 days period to, plug the holes essentially while we redesign. Because a redesign is going to take anywhere from 6 to 8 months for, I'd say, a medium site.
Hmm.
But for a site the size of McMillan, like you're talking 12 to 16 months probably, right? And that's not even just the design, because the compliance is all about the content structure, the semantic HTML, the forms, the color, the design. Like it touches so many things. And I haven't even touched on PDFs, right? Which I think tends to bite a lot of people. They redesign the whole site and then they forget about the PDFs, and the PDFs aren't accessible. So that's just a long tangent about our experience so far. But
Yeah, and the other thing I've seen is that the compliance officers want to see that the organization has engaged somebody to do it, and then
Okay.
they're on the timeline. Because then if you've got they retain you guys to, and you tell them it's going to be 12 months. That's a practical reality that the compliance officers, in my experience, have always accepted. It's more of the, hey, we need 90 days just to get this up the chain to make a decision, and then we'll let you know, and then we need another 60 days to do a RFP process to find the right consultant, and that's when the compliance officers say that you got to move a little quicker. Like, we got to show us that you're actually
Right.
taking this seriously. But as soon as you can show, like, hey, we've hired somebody, they're working on it, this is their timeline, they, again, in my experience, have like respected that time.
That's awesome.
right.
Okay. That's
So
great.
they're reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
think what
also
I
pushing some action.
yeah, like, I think the only time I've seen the compliance officers start to get a little like prickly is when it's taking months to like make any decision. You're not
Mhm.
communicating with them on a regular basis. If they're asking for like simple documents or simple requests, that you're not meeting those deadlines, that's when I think organizations are really risking getting at least some sort of fine. But staying in communication, doing like the little things of like, hey, like if you have a policy already, send it to them. If one of your compliance problems is, you just need to fix some wording in your policy, or you just need to get your policy posted somewhere in the workplace, those are easier steps, right? So those
Mhm.
shouldn't take a year to do.
Mhm.
There's a couple other thresholds, and it seems like some of the requirements are a bit hard to. They're a bit vague. So if you're under 50 employees, I think there's like a 20 to 50 employee. There's some requirements that involve reporting accessibility reports, I believe, and then from like 0 to 20 employees, there isn't a huge compliance strictness on accessibility. And neither of those employee categories, mention specifically the website, but they do mention things like readily accessible information, things like that, which, if you're an organization that's under 50 employees and the website is your main customer interface, like what should you assume? What's sort of like the default state that you should be considering to make sure that you're.
Yeah, and just to go back to that, so like the like your last question about like enforcement, so that actually really ties to this like accessibility compliance report.
Mhm.
And so that's something like if you're over 20 employees, you've got this obligation to every 3 years fill in this compliance report and complete it and upload it to the government portal. Um, if you're at 20 to 50 employees, the compliance is really basic. Like you just need to sort of check the boxes because you're not meeting a lot of the thresholds to have, a written policy, a multi-year plan, or a web accessible. But yeah, again, to go back to the last question, that's also when uh, a lot of enforcement can happen. Is an organization basically fills out the compliance report that they're not compliant. And that's something I've seen a lot more of. And it seems now to like, if you fill out the compliance report in a way that shows that if you check, yes, I have 50 or more employees, no, I am not web compliant, you'll get audited. You'll get a response from the government, an auditor assigned to you within a few weeks, typically, in my experience.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and that's something that's like, and so the next deadline's an every 3 year thing you have to do. The next one is the end of this year, so December 31st. So I think it's actually like a really good reminder for organizations to start thinking about that now, because you do have an obligation if you're over 20 employees to basically offer up your own compliance status by the end of this year. And so if you're above the 50 threshold, that includes web content.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I'm assuming there's a lot of reports that are going to be going in not accessible.
Yeah, and it's basically it's the way to get yourself on the ministry's radar, right?
Yeah,
Like
okay.
I've had a lot of clients who didn't know about the compliance report, and they weren't doing it. But then they saw it as a requirement. Now they're doing it, but they're not doing the other web content or the other accessibility requirements. So they're filling this compliance report out basically just to out themselves to the government, and then they get an auditor assigned. So now is certainly like a good time for organizations to be thinking about all of their accessibility requirements, but like particularly the web stuff, which is going to take longer. Like, you can put together a written accessibility policy and have it on your website in a couple of weeks. But if there's some web deficiencies, having that extra, couple of months to get ahead of it is certainly an advantage.
All right, so yeah, David. So even if the law references WCAG 2.0, like this is a big question of ours. The rules or the like WCAG itself is evolving. So we're at like WCAG 2.0. There was 2.1, but the law still references 2.0, and we're already projecting to 2.2, which is the newest recommendation, which is what W3 advises. So like, what are some practical interpretations that companies should consider here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, you're over the 50 threshold. Like the 2.0, it is the floor. Like you need to meet it. It's been in place for a long time. And you guys would probably know this better than I would, but like doing a full update to get to to the 2.0, it does, there is always room for the government to, they'll give notice, but to pass a regulation that bumps it up a level. And then, you're back to, okay, we need to re-audit the website. We need to rehire these consultants. So I think it's something for organizations, if you're going through the process of redesigning, or even just as you're creating new web content, is like thinking about, what's the cost of getting, one step ahead, and that mitigates the risk of new regulation comes out by 2027. We're looking at 2.1 or 3.0 or 2.2. Like it's certainly, possible. I haven't specifically seen the government talking about bumping that standard up. Like I think their goal is still to get more websites to the 2.0. But it is certainly possible that they increase the requirements, because they're falling quite far behind what is like the recommended sort of international standard, right?
Right. Yeah, because 3.0, I think it's still quite a ways off, but 2.2 has been around for a while now. So it's kind of like a little bit of the like letter of the law, spirit of the law kind of thing. Like the letter is 2.0. You could hit the floor and be happy with that. At least you're compliant. But really, the spirit should be more focused on taking a look at those WCAG guidelines, what they currently are, and trying to fit to that.
Yeah, and I think just anticipating that as these accessibility, standards change, the law could very well change too, right? And
Yeah.
that's the letter of the law that could change, not just the spirit. And like there's I think that goes into like almost everything with like accessibility compliance too, is like there's a lot of like spirit to the legislation, right? Like they want organizations to be proactive a little bit, thinking about accessibility themselves, and sort of going a bit beyond, what the letter of the law is in terms of like, making your workplace accessible for employees and, accommodating, individual, disabilities and things like that. Same thing with like customer service. Like there's certain like letter of the law things about like self-serve kiosks and allowing service dogs and different, alternative formats. But there's a big element of like, are you proactively providing services in an accessible manner? And I think that's something organizations can really benefit from as like a bit of just like a constant mindset of like, whenever we're designing, the business structure, how we're operating, are we keeping, these things in mind?
Right. It's a really good point.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Simon. Did you have a question?
No, I was
Okay.
waiting for your cue.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, this is a question maybe for both of you guys, but if an organization is getting ready to submit that report, or they're considering accessibility as it applies to their websites, what are the first steps they should take?
Or just like that very basic is count your employees, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And figure out like what the requirements are. Like, it's only on employees in Ontario that count, but at the same time, it's like all part-time, seasonal, everyone you've got employed. So
Are contractors included in that?
they're not, no.
Okay.
But yeah, I've had lots of clients come and say like, hey, we thought we were at 47 employees. But we hired 3 more people, and now we're above the 50 threshold. And that happens all the time. So and honestly, my other recommendation is if you're in the 40s, start thinking about this now, because like, particularly for small companies that are growing fast, like if you're growing from 20 to 50 employees, you've probably got a lot on your hands to think about, right? Like you've got your business is obviously growing fast. You've got lots of things changing. Having this then become we need to do this quickly to satisfy an auditor, is way less enjoyable than, hey, we got ahead of this, and, started thinking about this when we were at 20 employees.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a good segue to my suggestion, which is start with an audit. Like, know where you stand, irrespective of where you are on the employee scale. Like, it just helps to know if you're compliant or not, what you have to remediate, because like it can impact people. It doesn't have to be these fines or the government coming down. It could be that your audit reveals something that's keeping other users outside of your platform or your event. Like an anecdote I met someone at an event recently, and they were telling me about a very uh, popular, prominent Toronto event that happens annually. I will leave it unnamed for the time being. And they were looking at all of the different locations that these sub events were happening. And she told me that she didn't know which ones were accessible or not. So she just didn't even bother to go to any. Like you just missed out on that person. And this is someone actively engaged in that community, willing to put it in the effort to come out here, build, support the community, and learn. And you've just cut them out by just something as simple as providing information about a location, right? And even if you think you don't have to because it's the location's responsibility, you're the one putting up the event, like put it there. You shouldn't expect the user to have to go to Google Maps to find out if it's accessible or not. So, all to say, again, a little bit of a tangent, but do the audit first. Like it's not about compliance, it's about just ethics at some point.
Yeah, and I think that ties into like the web accessibility too, of like, if, you've got people who need, web content to be in an alternative format, like that might be something that maybe you're not legally required to provide that, but you're also cutting off customers by not doing it, right? And so that there's more of like the spirit of the law is like provide your services in a accessible manner. Um, but there's also like complaint mechanisms, right? In the AODA, like somebody can basically file complaints about, or there's lots of mechanisms other than just getting a spot audit for there to be compliance. And then the other piece that I see often is how this ties into the Human Rights Code in Ontario, which is a much
Mm.
broader like accommodation requirement for somebody with disabilities. It applies in like the employment context, right? Like your company or if you have an employee, you need to accommodate disabilities up to the point of undue hardship. Um, but it applies in customer service as well. Like if somebody's coming into your business and they're not being treated, or if they're not being able to access services, they're being treated differently because of a disability. You've got a human rights complaint on your hand as well, which are those are also going to be tens of thousands of dollars in potential like legal fees and litigation, and then fines and damage awards from the Human Rights Tribunal.
Wow, that's fascinating. So it's not even just about the accessibility compliance. It can escalate to a human rights violation pretty quickly from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think make that would be very, very rare in a web content, like sort of environment. But certainly, like if you're going into a store and you're not able to order, or you're not being provided with accommodations to access those services, like there's plenty of human rights cases on like sort of discrimination in that sense. So yeah, I think to me it goes back to like, are you thinking about accessibility as you're designing everything that you do? Like, again, it doesn't need to like drive your business. Like it obviously is not the most important thing for companies, but it's just something that should just always be in the back of the mind of like, are we providing this in an accessible way? Like what are the small things we could do to make this a more inclusive service or product?
Right. And I guess you should be looking at it as a holistic journey too, like not just these single points of failure, but like what does it look like from a phone call to someone visiting the site to someone coming to a physical location.
Yeah, for sure.
Good advice. Um, okay, let's. I think this is a good spot to wrap it up. We'd like to end with one hard truth and one piece of encouragement for organizations trying to get this right. So I will kick that over to you, David, to start.
Yeah, I think the hard truth is like you're not going to be able to get out of these obligations. Like the one thing that I've had like people come to me over is like, there's a test, or like the web content has a provision about like if it's not practical to comply, you don't have to. And I've had a lot of clients read that and think that like, hey, this isn't practical. And I'm like, yeah, I know
Oh
it's
my
not.
god.
Um, but that again is like, yeah, a bit of like what the spirit of the law is. And like, if you, and then going back to the word of the law, if you read it, it's like not practical, taking into account the availability of like softwares and tools. So it's like,
Got it.
I know this isn't practical for you, like, in that sense, but there's softwares, there's tools, there's, consultants who can do this for you. It's going to cost money, but that is not going to get you out of the like practicality of it.
Wow,
Speaking of
that's a
software
shocking
and
one.
tools, yeah, that is funny. We actually have an accessibility scanner that I'm going to add to the notes for anyone that's listening and wants to just scan their website before reporting is due. David, where can people learn more about you or reach out to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I we'll put my contact information, into the websites, and I'm McMillan's got a website with my contact information as well, and always happy to help with accessibility questions. or broader accommodation obligations, anything like that.
Awesome. So we'll include all that information as well. At Tennis, we help teams design and rebuild sites and platforms with accessibility in mind from the beginning, so you don't have to retrofit under pressure. If this is interesting, subscribe. You can also reach out to us through the website. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, David. Take it easy.